now let's work with some proportions. So when you're asked to solve a proportion or solve for a missing part, there's a definite set of steps that you take. First, you cross multiply. So we have a proportion here. Remember, cross multiplying means to multiply the top of one side times the bottom of the other. So bottom of one side times the top of the other. That's cross multiplying. Very important is that you leave that equal sign right in the middle and write your multiplication on each side. So on this side I had an 8 times an x, and on this side a 3 times a 14. That was the bottom of one side times the top of the other. The next step we're going to do is we're going to simplify that. So do your multiplication. 3 times 14 is 42. Still leave that equal sign there. And 8x, there's really nothing we can do to simplify that. The final step is to go ahead and solve. Solve this equation for x. It's 8 times x, and we need to get x alone, so we do the opposite of multiplying by 8, and we divide both sides by 8. And I get 5.25. Okay? That is how we solve basic proportions. Now they're going to get a little trickier as they add some more things in. Here are 2 more examples. So if I wanted to solve number 1, again, first thing we do is cross multiply. Leave the equal sign in the middle. Put your multiplication on each side. So here I had a 22x, and here I had 4 times 5. Simplify, so do the multiplication that you can. On this side, 22x isn't going to change, but over here, 4 times 5 is 20. Okay, now we divide to solve. We have 22 times x. We have to divide both sides by 22, so that x will be all alone, and we'll have that problem solved. And this is going to be an ugly answer. It's about 0.9. It's 909. Right, and finally, here we go. We cross multiply. Let's do this one also. So you notice even though the x is in a different spot, it's on the bottom instead, we still solve the same way. You cross multiply, leave the equal sign in the middle. Write your multiplication on each side. Now we simplify, so we take and do our 36 times 7. That gives us 252. Okay, and now we finish solving. Divide both sides by 63. When we do that, we get x is 4. Okay. Another way people sometimes do this is they take a look. This first one we couldn't have done this way. This one we can. They look and go, okay, 7 times what is 63? It's times 9. And over here, what times 9 is 36? Well, that's 4. If you prefer that way, you can do it on some, but the cross multiplying works every time. Alright, so here we have some more examples of proportions. These are a little more complicated. We have addition, we have multiplication with this. Okay, so let's go through these examples. They look a little more complicated, but you start them exactly the same way. We have fraction equal to a fraction, which is a proportion. So you start by cross multiplying the bottom of one side times the top of the other, leaving your equal sign in the middle. So on one side of the equal sign we have 2x times 2x, and on the other side we have 20 times 5. Simplify, so let's do that multiplication. 2 times 2 is 4, and x times x gives us x squared on the left hand side. On the right hand side, 20 times 5 is 100. We simplified, now we need to solve. We have 4 times x squared. We want to get the x all alone. The first problem is it's multiplied by a 4. So let's go ahead and do the opposite of multiplying by 4. Divide both sides by 4. That gives us x squared equals 25. 100 divided by 4 is 25. And finally, we're left with x squared equals 25. To get rid of a squared, you do the opposite and you do the square root. So we take the square root of 25. Now if you do that in your calculator, it's going to give you one answer. The answer is going to be 5. But you have to remember that also Negative 5 would work here because negative 5 times negative 5 is also a positive 25. So we end up with two possible answers, 5 and negative 5. Anytime you take the square root to solve, you have to take that into consideration. You should have one positive, one negative. Right, let's try the next example. So again, you start the same way. You cross multiply the bottom of one side times the top of the other with the equal sign in the middle. So over here I get 3 times 6. On the other side I get 4 times the whole thing, x plus 3. And we simplify. 3 times 6 is 18. And on this side we distribute to get rid of those parentheses. 4 times x is 4x, and 4 times 3 is 12. Finally, we solve. So this is a little bigger problem. We have 4x plus 12. We need to get rid of the plus 12. So we do the opposite and we subtract 12 from both sides. Okay, we get 4x equals 6. Now we have 4 times an x. We need the opposite of multiplying by 4 and divide by 4. We get 6 divided by 4 is 3/2 or 1.5. Alright, here is our final example. So this one, again, we have a little more complication. We have x's in more than one place. You start the same way. You cross multiply. So take the bottom of one side times the top of the other. That gives us x plus 4 times x plus 4. The equal sign and a 5 times 20. We want to simplify. Now one way to write x plus 4 times x plus 4 is x plus 4 squared, because you're taking it times itself. And then we have 5 times 20, which is 100. Right, so now we have x plus 4 squared equals 100. We need to get x by itself. The whole thing is squared here, so we start by getting rid of the squared. The opposite of squaring is to do the square root. And remember, when you take the square root, you have both a positive and a negative. The square root of 100 is 10. It's also negative 10 because 10 times 10 is 100, and negative 10 times negative 10 is 100. So we have two possible answers here. We have both x plus 4 equals a positive 10 and x plus 4 equals a negative 10, so that we get those two possibilities in there. And solve both. So all we have to do here to solve this equation is subtract 4 from both sides, and we get x equals 6. Over here the same, we have a plus 4, so we do the opposite and subtract 4 from both sides, and we get x is negative 14. So those are our two answers.